Pride is a cardinal sin, and there's a reason for that. And
prosecutors used Hunter Biden's own voice as a key piece of evidence.
Tough times for a beloved Southern California company.
The simplest way to explain capitalism versus communism is to look at a family.
Jordan Peterson's takes on Pride Month go viral, Hunter Biden is on trial, California's minimum wage law backfires yet again, and a hilarious Marxist TikTok. All this and so much more is coming up on today's episode of Brad vs. Everyone, my daily series where I take on the craziest ideas from across the internet and from across our politics from a center-right, independent perspective. If you're new here, please consider subscribing and sticking around. We're building a really fun community here. And if you're a returning viewer, you know what I'm about to say. Don't forget to hit that like button and please do comment with your thoughts as we go along. I do read the comments and I pick a few to respond to in every episode. So without further ado, let's get into our first topic today because Dr. Jordan Peterson just did an interesting interview with Fox News where he gave his thoughts on Pride Month. Now, folks who followed me for some time will know that I have nuanced but pretty critical thoughts about the modern pride movement. So I found Dr. Peterson's interview interesting, especially because he's somebody who I've appreciated some of his work in the past and found him thoughtful, but also at sometimes do disagree with him or find some of his takes extreme. This interview kind of perfectly encapsulated that because he made some good points, I thought, some things I disagree with, and then some things where I agree, but he said it a little too extremely for my tastes. We're going to break it all down, and then you can let me know who you agree with. Here's the first clip where he talks about why pride is a bad thing inherently.
So what are my thoughts about Pride Month? Well, the first thing I would say is that you should be very careful what you name things. And pride is not a virtue. And I've brought that up with people before, and their objection always is, well, they don't really mean pride. People are just trying to affirm their own identities. And, you know, fair enough, I suppose, to some degree, but that was the name that was chosen, and that's the name that stuck, and pride is a cardinal sin, and there's a reason for that, and the reason is that pride means something like stubborn refusal to change when evidence of error is accruing, and it's not a good thing.
So you hear this a lot when people critique the notion of pride. Pride is a sin. And I've always found this argument head-scratching because there is a sin called pride, but it's referring to something specific and not all forms of pride in total. According to Encyclopedia Britannica, in the theological sense, pride is defined as an excessive love of one's own excellence. It's the opposite of humility. Or, as Peterson describes it, it's stubbornness in the face of contradicting facts. That could certainly describe some people in the modern alphabet movement, trust me, but it's not really relevant or applicable to pride in general. The pride movement, at least theoretically, is about celebrating self-acceptance and your family and your love and being who you are and overcoming adversity. There's nothing about it that's inherently arrogant or inherently denying facts that undercut your own excellence. I mean, I'm sure Dr. Peterson has told his daughter, Michaela Peterson, that he's proud of her. Was that a deadly sin? Of course not. There's a sense in which pride is just feeling good about your accomplishments or feeling good about yourself for justifiable reasons, but not excessively so and arrogant. And in that sense, pride is a good thing. Having pride in your work is a good thing. I'm sure Dr. Peterson has pride in the show that he creates for Daily Wire. He's proud of the product he puts out into the world. Again, that's not a deadly sin. We saw Harrison Butker do this recently, take a shot at the entire idea of Pride Month as celebrating a deadly sin. And to me, it's just a losing argument, because it conflates something pretty different to a narrow biblical definition of pride in a double standard they never apply to other common day versions of pride that aren't viewed as sinful or bad. Now, Dr. Peterson's second criticism of the Pride movement talked about what he calls sexual narcissism.
There's a real tinge of narcissism, sexual narcissism, about the whole Pride spectacle. And, you know, do people have the right to express their sexuality the way they see fit? To some degree, if it's consensual and among adults, but generally among human beings with any degree of civilized comportment whatsoever, it's a pretty damn private affair. We tend to be private in our sexual conduct as a species. And so this isn't exactly private. And it's also the case that identities based on something as narrow as sexual desire, let's say, aren't identities at all. They're pronouncements of subjection to instinctual whim.
So I agree with the first part of what he says here. The modern pride movement is absolutely tinged with sexual narcissism. One of the reasons I've criticized it so extensively is because it is so hypersexualized. At least in the official pride marches and parades, it's very often not about celebrating gay love and family and acceptance and tolerance, but it's about walking around in assless chaps, or many people dress up in kink and fetish gear in front of children, or lots of other stuff that is both disturbing and I think gives our community a very bad name, and yes, is narcissistic in the sense that people are elevating their personal sexual desires and wanting to flaunt them over what's best for the community, or the fact that it's not really an appropriate time or place or venue for that kind of conduct, which, as far as I'm concerned, knock yourself out, but doesn't really belong in public parades. The part I disagree with, though, about what Dr. Peterson says here is when he does this thing that conservatives will often do, where they conflate being gay with your sexual preferences, or as he puts it, an identity based around your sexual desires. To me, this really misses the mark. Being gay is not just about sex. It's about love, it's about romance, and it's about family as well. It's about who you will build a life with, who your life partner will be, who you might co-parent with one day. It's about so much more than just what happens in the bedroom. In the same way that you being proud of your wife and showing people pictures of your beautiful wife isn't you flaunting your sexual desires and preferences. She's your partner, she's your family, you're proud of the person that she is, you're proud of the love you share. It's about a lot more than just sexual preferences. But people on the right will often reduce gay identity to that when they're speaking derisively, and I really do reject that. Although I do acknowledge that the LGBT community plays into that notion with its hypersexualized displays, which is one of the many reasons that I criticize and don't support those. Next, Dr. Peterson touched on the tension between the LGB and the T and the gender activism in a way that I found very interesting.
And I also have a real problem with the idea of the LGBT plus, etc. community, because it's not a community. And it's especially not a community right now because the trans pushing, gender affirming butchers and liars primarily target young people whose most likely outcome on the sexual front is homosexuality. So the transgender affirming butchers and liars are differentially destroying the youthful gay community. And that's not a community by any stretch of the imagination.
Now, he puts it in terms that are a little extreme for me, but I do agree that there is tension between the radical trans activists and gender activists and the LGBs and the traditional understanding of homosexuality. Now, to be clear, I don't feel that old school transsexuals, like my friends Blair White or Buck Angel, I don't feel there's anything about what they advocate for or how they want to live their lives that is at odds with being gay and the gay acceptance and the gay movement more broadly. I don't view those as in conflict. But the modern trans activism, which essentially increasingly denies the reality of biological sex and pushes extremely nebulous and problematic arguments and ideas about gender identity, does undercut the legitimacy of homosexuality. After all, if sex is just a feeling or a spectrum or can change, then being same-sex attracted is not an immutable characteristic, the way we argued it was, rightly so, when we argued for acceptance. There is tension there. And there is tension between the fact that the trans activist community pushes for irreversible medical transitioning of minors, which I oppose, and that in the absence of transitioning, a lot, it's hard to say exactly how many, but at least a significant number of these gender-confused youth would eventually desist and not have gender dysphoria, and many would just end up being feminine gay men or butch lesbian women. So the radical gender activism and the extreme trans stuff is absolutely in some ways an attack on the gay community. So much so that these trans activist groups literally declare that the word homosexual is now verboten. So I thought he made an interesting point here, and it's something I've spoken about as well. Now, this last clip I want to show you is a little bit of a roller coaster ride.
Now, I read recently, like this week, that support for gay marriage is plummeting. Right. It's like, well, keep pushing. You're going to lose everything you've gained. And I'm not celebrating that at all. That's not the point at all. But like, I'm just done with it. I don't like the flag. I think it's a piece of idiocy. I don't understand why it changes every bloody week. I don't know who makes those decisions. I don't like the acronym and all the mystery surrounding it. I don't like the fact that the LGBT agenda, whatever that is, increasingly dominates the school system. I don't like the fact that it's targeted at young people. And I think the surgery, the gender-affirming care movement, I think it is Nazi Auschwitz level awful. That it should not only stop, and now, as they've decided to do in the UK and in most places in Europe, but I think all the people that were involved in the surgical transition of minors should be imprisoned. So there's a lot of house cleaning to do on the pride side of things.
So even as a gay guy, I was with him until the end there. I totally understand the dislike for the ugly as shit, ever-evolving flag that's so hideous that a gay person definitely was not involved in designing it. Like, we don't need anything past the basic rainbow. That's the point of the rainbow. It already includes everybody. And he's absolutely right that we are seeing some modest declines in gay acceptance and support for gay marriage. And I do partially attribute that to a pendulum swing, to backlash with how far insane and extreme LGBT activism has gone. If you tell people that in order to accept the LGBT community, you have to accept biological males dominating women's sports, or irreversible medical changes to minors, or neopronouns and non-binary and all the other TikTok nonsense, then yeah, some people are just going to reject the whole thing. And I'd like people to have more nuance and maybe pick and choose what makes sense to support and what doesn't, but that's not how many people think, honestly. Which is part of why I've spoken out, right? Is to stop this pendulum swing, to give people an alternative, a sane middle ground on these issues. But I don't think he's wrong that this is happening, this backlash, in part because of people going too far within the LGBT community. I think that's undeniable at this point. I will say that even when I agree with him, that he does this a lot nowadays, increasingly so, far more than he did earlier in his career. Peterson loses me with the extreme nature of some of his rhetoric. I'm against the medical transitioning of minors. I have been for years on record. I think it's bad. I don't support it. I think these European countries are doing the right thing by rolling it back and restricting it. But don't compare it to the Nazis in Auschwitz. Come on. Unless millions of people have been systematically killed somewhere and I just missed it, that's not an appropriate comparison. Almost nothing is actually comparable to the Nazi era, and people do this all the time, comparing stuff to it, but it just hurts their own arguments, really. People on the right can recognize this when insane woke lefties were constantly calling Trump literally Hitler. Y'all can see how silly that sounds, right? Even if you don't like him, he's never literally been equivalent to Hitler. Well, even if you don't like it, even if you think it's evil, if it's wrong, you want to ban it, gender-affirming care is still not akin to the Nazis, guys. Come on, touch grass. And I also don't really agree with the idea of locking up doctors who provided legal and recommended care. You can't put people in jail retroactively for something that was completely legal when they did it. That's actually kind of Orwellian. And while I do think in many cases they were mistaken to do so, they were just following the standards and recommendations set out by the medical authorities that they defer to in their field. Lots of these doctors probably earnestly believe they were doing what was in this kid's best interest. Now, maybe some of these kids might have malpractice claims somewhere along the line here, but that's a civil matter. Locking up doctors for following the law and doing what was recommended by the expert industry associations that set standards for medical treatments isn't fair, and isn't reasonable. That's just my take. I did find this interview really interesting, and it was getting a lot of buzz online, so I wanted to give my thoughts on it and hear yours. Let me know in the comments who you agree with, Dr. Peterson, myself, or a little bit of both. And now let's talk about Hunter Biden, the president's wayward son, who's on trial this week in a criminal case. Now, my take on this might surprise you slightly, because I'm going to make sort of a defense of Hunter Biden. But first, here's some coverage from 5 News to help us get caught up on what's going on.
After emotional opening statements in Hunter Biden's federal gun trial today, the Delaware jury could hear deeply personal witness testimony. As soon as today, prosecutors could call Hunter Biden's ex-wife and other family to the stand. Jared Hill has the latest.
In an intense day of opening statements, prosecutors used Hunter Biden's own voice as a key piece of evidence in their case against the president's son. First Lady Jill Biden, sitting behind him as an FBI agent, played clips from Hunter Biden's 2021 audiobook of his memoir Beautiful Things, in which he details his crack addiction, the same year he bought the gun at the center of the case.
I used my superpower, finding crack anytime, anywhere, less than a day after landing at LAX in the spring of 2018.
Prosecutors will tell you that there are few things more effective before a jury than being able to show the jury what the defendant said. In this case, hearing the defendant's own voice describing his struggles with addiction and the fact that he was using illegal controlled substances right around the time he bought this gun.
Hunter Biden has pleaded not guilty to felony charges. He made false statements on a federal background form by not acknowledging his drug use when applying for a handgun in October of 2018, then possessing it illegally. Biden's defense argued the president's son didn't knowingly make false statements because he was seeking sobriety, and like other addicts, experienced a deep state of denial.
They're really trying to paint Hunter Biden as someone who was making good faith effort to get himself clean.
If convicted, Hunter Biden could face up to 25 years in prison.
So let me try to explain this case in as simple as terms as possible. Hunter Biden is a longtime self-admitted drug abuser, but he also purchased a handgun, and you have to fill out a form that asks you some questions as part of federal law. One of those questions requires you to attest that you are not a user of any unlawful drug. He said he wasn't, which isn't true and is directly contradicted by public evidence, including his own audiobook memoir, and now is being held accountable for lying on a federal form, violating federal law, to obtain a firearm. On one level, they've got him dead to rights, and it's hard to feel too much sympathy for the guy. He clearly, knowingly checked off the wrong box on this form, and he's openly confessed and bragged about his drug use. So it's easy to look at this case and be like, wow, a person who, by the way, I'll just say, is not a good person, right? He really is a sleazeball. It's easy to just say this guy played stupid games and he won stupid prizes, and he should be held accountable like anybody else for breaking the law. So on one hand, I'm like, yeah, get him, good. On the other hand, though, this law, I really don't think it should exist. And the potential punishments here seem wildly excessive. Plus, if his name wasn't Hunter Biden, prosecutors probably wouldn't even have bothered to prosecute this case. First, this law, this federal law, makes it unlawful for anyone who uses drugs in any capacity, including just marijuana guys, to purchase a firearm. That's stupid. That's dumb. Now, maybe if we're talking about literal crack or something heavy and serious, that's potentially problematic. But just because somebody smokes pot doesn't mean they should be stripped of their Second Amendment rights and their ability to purchase a firearm. And I'm honestly open to the idea that even more heavy drug users, unless there's real evidence showing that that makes them incredibly likely to be violent, and I'm really not sure there is, should still have the right to self-defense. As long as they're not using the firearm while actively high, of course, but that's different from simply being a drug user and also owning a firearm. But let's say you do think this should be a crime. Still, 25 years in jail? Now, he probably won't get that. He might not even get jail time. But we're talking about a crime with no victim. Nobody was hurt. nobody's rights were violated. As far as I'm aware, he never even did anything wrong with the firearm. Incarcerating people should be a last resort for when they're a danger to society, a menace, and they've harmed someone. But he could potentially get more time in jail than many people who commit sexual assault get. People who commit manslaughter, whose actions take someone's life. I have absolutely no love lost for the Biden family or for Hunter Biden, but I'm sorry. That strikes me as unreasonable and unfair. And here's the other thing, guys. If Biden was just an everyday American and did this exact same thing, they probably wouldn't even have prosecuted him. As Reason's Jacob Solom reports, the fact that Biden was prosecuted at all for violating Section 922G3 marks his case as highly unusual, because millions of people do this and never get prosecuted. Solom reports that judging from survey data on drug use and gun ownership, something like 20 million Americans are committing that felony right now. The Justice Department prosecutes only a minuscule percentage of those potential defendants. That is partly because such cases are not a high priority, which tells you something about the logic of treating this offense as a felony that is currently punishable by up to 15 years in prison. The main reason that gun-owning drug users are rarely prosecuted is that the government generally does not know who they are. So again, on one hand, it's kind of Hunter's fault because he confessed publicly, accidentally sort of, with his autobiography and his other public displays of drug use. But on the other hand, there's something wrong about a selective enforcement system where tons of people commit a crime but only certain ones get held accountable, especially when, again, nobody was hurt. Hunter Biden is nobody's idea of an innocent hero, but I still don't really think this case against him is productive or fair. That's just my take on it, but you guys can let me know what you think in the comments below. Up next, California's $20 minimum wage mandate is backfiring yet again. Here's some local coverage from KCAL News.
It's sad to see that it's a quality, good company that can't keep all of their Rubio's open.
Customers with a hankering for Rubio's fish tacos might have to drive a little farther to get their fix. The restaurant's owners announced Friday they had shuttered more than a third of its locations, including 24 in the LA area. In a statement saying the closings were brought about by the rising cost of doing business in California. While painful, the store closures are a necessary step in our strategic long-term plan to position Rubio's for success for years to come. Disappointed customers across the state echoing the company's frustration.
Yeah, I'm sure a lot of businesses are going through the same problems. You know, we're overtaxed, we're overburdened.
Rubio's closures, of course, mean lots of workers lost their jobs. The company did not confirm how many. Wheaton says in the last 9 months, including since the minimum wage hike, about 10,000 fast food workers in the state overall have lost their jobs. That's about a 1.3% decline.
So, you mean to tell me that they hiked the minimum wage to $20 an hour for the restaurant industry, which already runs on very tight profit margins, and now a bunch of restaurants are closing locations? This is my shocked face. And of course, it's not just this one chain that we're seeing in this latest news development. It's tons of chains and tons of businesses that are closing down and laying off workers who were supposed to be helped by this minimum wage hike, but ended up out of a job and screwing over all the consumers that like to go to these places, all because progressive politicians refuse to stop helping. How bad does it have to get before they wake up, before they realize that this is foolishness? I don't know, guys. I truly don't know. All right, now it's time for Brad versus TikTok, my series where I take on the craziest ideas from the Clock app.
Pronoun of the day is slugs.
Don't forget to subscribe and stick around if you're enjoying this video, and hit that like button. Now, we're going to take a look at a rather interesting Marxist TikTok.
The simplest way to explain capitalism versus communism is to look at a family. Pretty much every sane person runs their family under a communist economic model. You're living communally.
So far I actually agree. People do run their own family units like a communist system, I guess, in a way. But that very much only works at that extremely small local level and small scale, involving people who deeply care about each other and in fact will put each other's needs over their own. It doesn't work applied to a whole society where you expect people to treat random strangers like family. For example, right, if I have kids one day, I will be happy to work hard and then share whatever wealth I earn with them, even though they won't give me anything direct in return. But I'm not, and I would never be, willing to just do the same for some random stranger. Ironically, this kind of explains why socialism and communism are doomed to fail, because they're utopian and they deny human nature. But he's setting this up like it's going to make the case for communism. Interesting, I guess. Let's see where it goes.
A capitalist economic model applied to a family would be like if the dad owned the dishwasher, the laundry machine, and the lawnmower and charged his own kids to use those things. And let's say the mom owns the vacuum and she still has to pay to use the other appliances. Eventually, she's gonna run out of money. Even if she's charging the dad to use the vacuum, he's gonna be making a lot more money a lot faster than she is, and she might have to sell the vacuum cleaner to him, and then all of a sudden he owns all the appliances, and the whole family, because they didn't really come together and fight when they had the chance, they're indebted to the dad forever. He could use this economic model, the fact that all of the appliances in the house are his private property, he can use that to basically have indentured servants who do all of the housework for him for the rest of time. He's making astronomical profits compared to what the rest of his family is making, enough to hire security to guard his private property against his own family. Do you see how bizarre and antisocial capitalism gets when you follow the model's design and people's material interests just a little bit down that line? It always tends toward monopoly.
This hypothetical doesn't make any sense as a stand-in for free market capitalism. These appliances, like the dishwasher or whatever, are supposed to be goods or services that people need and must buy, right? But is there any world in which there's only one dishwasher, aka only one grocery store you can buy food at, only one gas station you can go to purchase fuel, only one place to buy or order clothes? I have never lived in such a place or encountered one, personally. No, in reality, in almost all places, especially in the era of the internet, you have many different options, and they're all competing to offer you lower prices or sales or higher quality products. In fact, the consumers really have the power there. So it's just nothing like the scenario he's describing. His argument also rests on the false assumption that free markets tend towards monopolies. But that's not true, because when you have big profits in an industry, that attracts new businesses to enter that field, to try to cash in on those profits and increases competition with a little bit of time. Look at TikTok, for example. They were becoming huge with these short-form vertical videos, and at first they were the only ones doing it, right? But then Instagram got in the game with Instagram Reels, Facebook Reels, they got in the game, and YouTube Shorts got in the game. Boom, monopoly eviscerated. Again, profitable industries actually reject monopoly. They attract competition. Now, there are some narrow exceptions where monopolies can form in a free market due to something called economies of scale, but it's a pretty specific set of circumstances that's not applicable in most cases. And usually, when you see a monopoly form, it's actually not because of free market capitalism, but it's because the government is colluding with big business to rig the system and put up barriers to block competition. That's actually anti-capitalist behavior, though, and it's not at all a free market. Anyway, I have a book recommendation for our communist TikTok friend here. Alright, I'm going to skip forward a little. It's a really long video and get to the rest of the good part I want to talk about.
And once the dad has kind of cornered the market and has the majority of those appliances, no one's really going to be able to compete. That's where socialism comes in. Socialism is the transition from that capitalistic model with the private ownership of property to communism, where there's no need for people to own property because we're all on the same team.
You hear that, guys? we're just all gonna be on the same team and all just work together for the common good. This is where the utopian thinking runs into reality. Humans are inherently self-interested beings. Now, sometimes our self-interest includes other people, like me caring about my future kids. But nobody is ever going to work hard just in pursuit of the nebulous collective common good out there in the universe. Thinking you can all be on one team in a country of 330 million people is delusional. Now, the beauty of capitalism, with restraints and with rules and frameworks set out, is that it harnesses humans' inherent self-interest towards productive ends. But if your economic system relies on people being inherently selfless and putting the greater good over their own self-interest, it is doomed to fail. It divorces effort from incentives. It promotes and encourages free riding, and it's fundamentally incompatible with human nature. Other than that, though, you're doing great. What do you guys think of this communist TikTok? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to hit that like button. Now, before we wrap up today's show, I'll read a few of your comments that y'all left on the last episode. One person says, as a Colombian, I swear, whenever I hear or read that abhorrent Latinx, my blood boils. It's just freaking neo-colonialism from woke Americans who are arrogant enough to make a whole group modify their language. Believe me, nobody here uses that horrendous word. It really is funny because it comes from the same crowd that rails against the evils of colonialism, but they're colonizing other people's language. I remember I went to Costa Rica a couple years back and I asked a bunch of people in my broken Spanish if they'd heard of Latinx or if it made sense to them, and they all looked at me like I was crazy. Another person says, if we're supposed to call people what they want to be called, why do these activists keep saying Latinx or WimXN or cis? It's a good question. Another guy says, as a center-left independent gay man, I really appreciate you and other sane, not queer, voices speaking up publicly to make it known that we're not all insane. Don't listen to anyone when they tell you that you look like Patrick Bateman. Wait, is that an insult? Isn't he like kind of good looking? But thank you. And yeah, you know, like any community, any demographic group of people, really not a community, gay people are individuals with different opinions and viewpoints and values. We're not some monolith. But it can seem that way from the representation of the mainstream LGBT community where everyone's a woke Democrat. Another person says, you trained me well. The first thing I do is hit the like and then focus on the video. Good job. That's exactly what I'm going for. So more of you, follow this person's lead. Another person says, Brad, don't listen to the haters. I like your simple and low-key setup. It's homely. So this is funny because I think you meant to say that it's homey, because to say it's homely is actually saying that it's ugly. But yeah, I'm going to work on my setup and eventually I'll probably have something different. But for now, guys, we're stuck with this. So deal with it, okay? Or feel free to donate a couple $1,000s for me to build an in-home studio. If you want to do that, I'm all ears. Another person put a laughing emoji at the people hating on Brad's background. I like the Grow As We Go painting. So here's the thing. Y'all are making fun of that like it's just some cheesy home goods art or something. And it is, but it has particular significance to me and my boyfriend because our song is the Ben Platt song, Grow As We Go. So I bet y'all feel like assholes now. Another person says, day 4, asking for a Polumbo plushie. And they've made that their username and image. Oh. Well, I feel slightly unsafe, and I probably won't be making or offering a Polumbo plushie because I would be disturbed by the thought of what people might use it for. But thanks for your interest. All right, everybody, that's it for today's episode. I can't do any more of this today. Thanks so much for tuning in. Don't forget to hit that like button, yada, yada, yada. We'll talk again tomorrow, all right?